3 weeks, and I've already missed the boat on that. And so what we want to do is not just aim at like a resolution, but how do we experience deep transformation? And so we're going to be talking about kind of the broad subject of emotional health today. And we're going to kind of dial that in the coming weeks of how do we get past distraction? How do we get past discouragement? And how do we get past disillusionment? And so we want to, like I said, dial in on emotional health. And emotional health and mental health are really intimately connected. For a lot of people, they're pretty much synonymous. As the emotions go, so does our mentality. And we see a lot of stuff on social media these days about self-care, about, man, I got to treat myself right. I got to fill myself with positivity. And, self-improvement, the self-improvement market is over $11 billion and growing. So if you're looking for a budding career, you're a writer, that's a great space to get into, self-improvement. And it's kind of ironic though, as we've seen the growth of that industry, we've seen actually a downward trajectory of mental health and emotional health over the past 15 years. That's largely been correlated with the rise of social media, which has been a huge kind of study in and of itself. And some mental health specialists have deemed something like an epidemic of a mental health crisis, particularly for people under 25, right? The rates of anxiety and depression and suicide have skyrocketed. And that was all before coronavirus hit. So this is really one of the most pressing questions of our generation is, how can I be emotionally whole? How can I be emotionally whole? And so first we got to start by defining some of our terms. What does it mean when we say emotional health? So emotional health is about how we think and feel. It's our sense of well-being. It's our ability to cope with life and events and how we acknowledge our own emotions as well as those of others. And so it doesn't mean being happy all the time. It means responding well in our thoughts and our emotions. So basically, how do we deal with life? And another way to put it that I think more helpful is, how can I be truly free? How can I be truly free? Free and at right in the world, free and at right with my past, free from the weights and burdens of life. How can I be free from the actions of others who have wronged me? And how can I be truly free? So we're going to jump in and we're going to start in this in Hebrews chapter 7, verse 25. And I'll just read one verse, and that's going to be kind of where we start off tonight. It says this: Therefore, Jesus is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. So the claim here is that Jesus saves us completely, right? Absolutely. He's completely saves us. And what's so interesting is that in Greek, the original language that the Bible was written in, the word for saved and the word for healed are actually the same exact word. So this has the strong implication that Jesus is able to completely heal us and keep us healthy. So full and emotional health can really only be found in Jesus. And it's my experience that people have incredibly, in life, they have incredibly deep-seated negative emotions. And those negative emotions in life have a way of coming out, no matter how good life is. That deep-seated pain, it manifests in ways. And I like to use this picture of, and it's not really original to me, obviously Jesus talked about this, the fruit and the root of a tree. So when you look at a tree, it can be a super healthy looking tree. It can be strong, but you don't know what's going on the inside. And you don't know how healthy a tree is until you start to pick the fruit. And when you start picking the fruit off a tree, you can tell, a healthy tree won't even bear any fruit to begin with, where you can tell how it's not getting enough nourishment, or things look good and the leaves are green, but there's more to it behind the story. And so what has to happen is you have to examine the root. What are the nutrients that this tree is drawing from? And sometimes you have to do special things like fertilize a tree to help it produce as much fruit as it's capable of. And so when that comes to our emotional health, I think of this kind of a funny interaction I had with a friend in high school. And she and I, we did art class together, and she's like the stereotypical, what you would think of as like blonde cheerleader type. She's smart, she's popular, she's cute, and she's well known. And, I made some offhand comment to her one time that, oh yeah, you remind me a lot of your mom. You have a lot in common. And she had this big outburst. She says, no, we're not. We're nothing alike. And it just showed me that, man, on the exterior, she's doing great by the world standards. But on the interior, she had some deep-seated negative emotions about herself, about her mom, about her origin. And to be honest, she bared some shame, I think. underneath that she did not want to be associated with that. And I meant it just I knew her mom, and I meant it as a compliment. I thought they were both great people. And so that just shows us a little example of how deep-seated some of our negative emotions can be. And so my central argument tonight is that the world can never ultimately deal with these emotions because it only treats the external effects and not the internal ones. So how does the world deal with negative emotions and emotional health? And it has some incredible techniques of dealing with the external effects. Don't get me wrong, I love them, and I like a lot of them myself. So let me just run through some of them. Self-care. This is really just, how do I fill myself with a lot of positive emotion? Taking vacations, doing things I enjoy, getting out in the sun, just filling myself with positive vibes all the way around. It's very self-focused, but I'm trying to fill myself back up. Another would be identifying the things that are not going well. If I can get the correct diagnosis, then maybe I can move forward, right? Going to see a psychologist, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. You hear a lot of talk about meditation or mindfulness, of slowing down, of thinking, of being mindful of what I'm experiencing and feeling. Another is people are very sensitive about changing narratives, right? So we talk a lot about thinking, changing the way that we think. And if we think the right thoughts about ourselves, we will no longer feel bad about ourselves. So I'm going to change what I tell myself, and that's going to be some tweak that helps me. Another one of my favorites is modern Stoics. Everybody knows the Stoic philosophers in ancient Rome. Our version of modern Stoics are like the Navy SEALs. All these guys that you see motivating you and just saying like, just own it, just bottle it up and keep pushing forward. Guys like Jocko Willink or David Goggins. Those guys were just like, yo, life is hard, suck it up, keep moving. Another one is lifestyle hacks. Maybe I can just tweak some habits or get into minimalism in design. You think like Marie Kondo, you pick up an object and say, does this give you joy? And if not, we throw it away, right? Another is how we deal with negative emotions is blaming society. And that can lead to a lot of social activism. We see that happening a lot. And then another one would be relentless success. So taking all of the negative things that have happened in life, bottling it all up and saying, how can I use this to drive me forward? And let me get to the top. And we hear this a lot with, I started from the bottom, now we're here. And hear that over and over again on social media. And so all of these things can actually be really helpful, and they have their right place. But ultimately, I don't think any of these things really get at the root. They never really treat the root. Even if they can point at the root, they can identify it, they can name the problem, they can never transform the problem. And so I think ultimately identifying the root of negative feelings, the world, after identifying, I say the world gives us two solutions based on one philosophy. So 2 solutions based on one philosophy. The first solution is denial, right? And so this can take a lot of forms, but it often goes something like this. The things that you feel guilty for doing, it's not really that bad. And in fact, if you act normally, you should be totally fine. Just go ahead and do it. Don't feel bad about it at all. Don't let somebody shame you for your life decisions. Just embrace it all. We can talk about a lot of them, but one of the ones that always sticks out to me as the most ridiculous is someone who says, hey, it's completely natural to have a lot of sexual urges. So in fact, we were never meant to be in monogamous relationships at all. It's called polyamory. And so, you're meant to have a lot of husbands and wives, and just that's how life is meant to be. And if you've ever been in a serious relationship, you know that you want commitment. You know that love is only meaningful in the presence of that commitment. And so, it's like, well, what do we do with that? And I think that leads us to the second treatment that our world has is that comes down to blaming other people. So, if you've been in a relationship and you've been betrayed or cheated on, man, it's very easy to blame that person because they did you wrong. They did you dirty. And so that's the other way that our world does it. It says, if the problem can't be inside of me, so I have to deny this bad feeling, stuff it down, or I have to completely blame it on somebody else. It goes something like this. This things that happens to me or makes me feel ashamed and rejected, it's all their fault. They did this to me. And I am really worthy of being loved. And I never deserve to be treated like this. And this leads us to not recognizing that sometimes we have a part to play in our own negative emotions. And sometimes it's by a whole class of people that get rejected. You hear this a lot by saying, all men are trash, or man, you can't trust women. It's just, we just wholesale just blame a whole group of people and say these people are using their power and their hegemony, and we have to tear that down. And that approach really kind of denies this dual part of our identity. Some of you might be familiar with the nature versus nurture argument. How much of our identity is based on who we are and our DNA and just kind of intrinsic to us, and how much of it is based on our society and the things that we experience and the things around us, the nurture. And so that approach says it's all nurture. If there's something wrong with you and you feel bad, it's all the problem around you. And so that, I think, the one philosophy that really underlies these two approaches is moral relativism. So basically it goes like this: there's a world, the only thing that exists is this world, and there's no objective moral standards to appeal to. So what is right and wrong then ends up getting redefined as what makes me feel good and what makes me feel bad. So if I feel good, then I should do it. And if it makes me feel bad, then it itself is bad or evil. Or if this person makes me feel bad, then this person is evil. So I want to act authentically only according to my emotions. And so we see a lot of that thinking going on right now. And so the only thing deemed evil in our society then is somebody that makes us feel bad about ourselves and puts limits on us. And so I just want to ask, does this work? Does that approach really work? Does all the self-help, does all the different approaches and denying and blaming others, does that really solve the problem? And I'm afraid it doesn't, right? And I would just point to pretty clearly to the evidence, right? The data is so clear that despite having more wealth, more military power, more upward mobility, more entertainment, and more medicine, that our world is getting more and more miserable. So we have this perpetual uneasy feeling of not being at home in the world and not being at home within ourselves, no matter how much we get. So there's this lingering question in all of our souls: how can I be truly free? How can I be truly free? And so, Brittany, I think you're running the question here. So I got a question for us. I want to stress test this. I love going to the extremes of ideas to kind of test and see how things are. So I want to ask this question to you of what is the worst negative emotion? I got 4 categories: fear and anxiety, guilt and regret, shame, and rejection. So Brittany, can you pop that poll up there for us? All right. I guess Brittany is not going to send that poll out. But you get the point. I think that those are probably the four categories that would be the worst emotions that we can experience. A lot of other emotions kind of range from there. And so actually we've talked a lot about how do we handle fear, how do we handle anxiety, the uncertainty and the unknown in our global pandemic, and with everything that's been going on. We've talked quite a bit about that. So what I want us to do is now take a look at what is the way of Jesus and how does he help us to process the most difficult emotions in life when it comes to guilt and regret, when it comes to shame, and when it comes to rejection. Because I'll tell you, if Jesus doesn't help us here, he's not going to help us anywhere. Why bother, right? These are some of the most difficult experiences that we can possibly have. If he's really a savior, he should be able to help us here. Get my point? So the way of Jesus is an inward transformation with outward fruit. I think the world takes this outward approach, right? And if we can just get all the circumstances around the tree right, then we'll feel better. We'll bear good fruit. But Jesus says, no, I'm going to treat the roots. I'm going to go deep down and I'm going to completely transform from the inside out. And then that will bear fruit over time on the outside. So that brings us back to the verse that we read at the beginning. It says, Jesus is able to save completely those who come to God through him. He's able to heal completely those who come to God through him. So how does he do that? How does he save us? First, he identifies the problem, and his identification is different. So coming back to this idea of nature versus nurture, right? God is incredibly nuanced and direct about how both of those lead to issues that affect us emotionally. So obviously, what happens in society affects us emotionally, but also what we do, right? We make mistakes. The world is messed up, society is messed up, and I am messed up. You are messed up. We all experience this brokenness that comes with being human. So back in the early 1900s, the Times of London put a question out to their prominent authors, and they asked them to write an essay on what is wrong in the world today. And one of the most prominent authors responded to them, a very short response. He says, "Dear sir, I am yours truly, G.K. Chesterton." So he just wanted to drive home the point that I am what's wrong with the world. You know, that evil, that line that divides good and evil, it's not just outside of me, it runs through my heart as well. And so if I'm really guilty and I've really wronged a person and wronged God, how can I possibly feel good about myself, right? How can I be made whole and how can I be set free? In the Christian faith, you know, we have one hope for restoration, only one. We have one move, and that is called the cross of Jesus. Hebrews 10:14 says this, "For by one sacrifice he has made perfect forever those who are being made holy." And in the book of Isaiah, it prophesies about the coming Messiah 700 years later. And it says this in Isaiah 53, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken for him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought him peace, the punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." So like I said, I want to take a look at how does the cross specifically set us free from guilt, shame, and rejection? Because I think if we don't treat these, I think these things will come out in radically unhealthy ways throughout the rest of our life. So we want to dig deep into those roots. So first is guilt. That guilt is the feeling of having done something wrong. And so remember, like, our world doesn't really believe in wrong unless you're restricting what someone wants you to do, and then that's wrong. But God has made us for a purpose, right? God has made us to love. He's made us to love our neighbor. He's made us to love himself and to love his creation. And so if he's made us for something, then when we fall short of that, that obviously should not make us feel good because we're not living up to what he's made us for. That again, just missing the mark of our purpose is what God in the Bible calls sin. And he's been explicitly clear about what's right and wrong through his word. It's not really a surprise, right? And if that wasn't enough, he's given us the ingrained sense of right and wrong through our conscience. So we all know, though, that knowing the right thing and doing the right thing, they're completely two different matters. So how, once we have done something wrong and we feel guilty for it, how do we make that right? Proverbs 28:13 says this, "Whoever conceals their sin," remember, just missing the mark, missing the purpose, the love that God has created you for. Whoever conceals their sin does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. Psalm 32:3 says this, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day after day and night, your hand was heavy on me, and my strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you and did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave me the guilt of my sin." And then again, in 1 John, it says this, "If we claim to be without sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just, and he will forgive our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness." So that's pretty explicit. The first thing we have to do is talk about it. We got to talk about it. We got to confess it. We got to say, hey, I did something wrong and I'm not perfect. And you know what? I actually renounce it. I'm going to turn my back on it. But that's conditional, right? What we just read in John, it says, only if I will do that, then I will be forgiven. Then I will be purified from all unrighteousness, right? We see this existential burden that's weighed down on the psalmist because he's hiding the roots. He's hiding his guilt. And when he confesses it, he finally says, I've said it out loud. Then he is relieved. He feels forgiven, and that transgression is covered over and is thrown away like it never even happened. And so how does the cross play into that? Ephesians 1 says this, it says, "In him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins, in accordance with the riches of God's grace that he has lavished on us." So redemption, right? That's not just like a cool word, like I'm going to come back, make a comeback. Redemption is a financial term, right? It means paid in full. My debt has been completely paid. So if I'm out driving and I'm on 76 or I'm driving around the city and I crash my Toyota Corolla, somebody has to pay for it. I have to pay for it. My insurance has to pay for it. Somebody has got to pay for that car and the damage it causes, right? Well, what happens if I crash my life, right? If I crash my life, who will pay to have my life fixed? Unfortunately, the payment that is owed for me destroying my life, for me crashing my life, for me living for less than my purpose and not loving people as I ought to and loving God is death itself. But God pays for it instead through his own death. That's crazy. That's skin for skin. That's life for life. He gets up on that cross and pays for me so he can stand up there and say, it is paid in full. And then he lavishes his grace on top of me. So it's like I crashed my Corolla, but God bought me a Bugatti. That's what we're talking about. It's not just getting me back to where I was. He lavishes even more on top of me. Man, of course that affects my emotions. That's why Isaiah 61 says this: I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation, and he has arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness. I love that. He has robed me, he has clothed me in his righteousness, his perfection. The fact that God has never sinned, he's never made a mistake. And when God looks at me, that's what he sees. He doesn't see my past anymore because that's been forgiven. I can get every skeleton out of my closet because it doesn't define me anymore. And I am forgiven. I'm set free. And I love what Romans 8 says. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And I know we've all had this experience where, we're just going about our day and then a random memory comes by and we just feel like, man, I can't believe I did that stupid thing so long ago. And we're just like, man, where did that thought come from? What do I do with that? And you know what? I just think that if I don't have a way of dealing with that in the moment, then I'm going to have to just bury that thought where it came from. But for me, I can always come back to the cross. I can always come back to saying, God, if I've repented, if I've left this thing behind, and if I've asked for forgiveness and made things right with the people that I've hurt, then you know what? That doesn't define me. That's what it means that there's no condemnation. You can point at my flaws. You can point at my failures. I can tell you them by name, and I'm not weighed down by them. I can be made whole and set free at the same time. I can be a free man because of what Jesus has done for me. So we are healed and set free from every feeling of guilt and walk away totally brand new. So that's powerful. That's powerful. And that affects us so deeply in our emotions. And there's nothing like being free. I'm telling you, it gets better than that. So, that's just the feeling of guilt, right? Guilt is I've done something wrong, and shame is there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my identity. And you can identify when you feel shame because you just want to hide, right? You want to when you have a thought and you just want to throw the covers over your head, that's a feeling of shame. Or you just want to pull your hoodie up, or you just want to walk across the street and not see that person again. It's because you feel ashamed about something. And so this is for free. If you're really prone to isolating yourself for unhealthy amounts of time, it might be because you have a deep-seated shame about something and you're letting that impact your behavior. So just take that and consider that for your own sake. But when we feel shame, it's for a lot of reasons. Typically, it's because I've done something wrong and I feel ashamed about it for something I've done in my past, or maybe something that somebody else has done to me and I feel ashamed about what they've done to me, or maybe it's what somebody said about me in public, around my friend group, or on social media. I feel ashamed from the words that have been spoken over me, and shame is a real killer. Shame, it's just awful. So, it might start privately with some private actions that we feel embarrassed and ashamed about, but it is always experienced publicly. If you feel shame, it always has a way of impacting how you interact with people. If it's at that root, it will be tasted at the fruit. And so since shame is experienced publicly, the antidote must be done publicly as well. So I want us to think about the father in the prodigal son story. So when the son comes running home, the father embraces him and he forgives him right away. But what does the father do? He doesn't just leave it at forgiveness. He throws a party. And when he throws that party, he clothes his son, right? Now, this is the same language, clothed in righteousness, clothed in the father's glory and the father's wealth. And in front of the whole neighborhood that this son would have come back and been embarrassed in front of, the father says, I love my son and I'm fully restoring him. That's incredible. That son could have carried shame even though he had no more guilt. But he gather the community and publicly acknowledge my son has been restored. You know what that is? The opposite of shame is honor. It's honor. When we are publicly honored, that is the only thing that can wipe away shame. So Romans 10 says, anyone who believes in Jesus will never be put to shame. Shame is not our portion because Jesus bore shame when he was crucified. You know that? That's crazy to me that Jesus allowed himself to be shamed. He was the King of Kings, yet he was publicly beaten. He was publicly spit upon, publicly mocked, and lifted up on a cross, literally lifted up so that other people can see his shame. And he was naked, you know? When you see a picture of a cross, and a symbol of Jesus on the cross, he always has a loincloth on. That's not how it was actually done. And it was meant to publicly expose people to shame. And so every shameful thing that we've ever done, and has it ever been done to us, we can bring out into the open and receive honor that was due to Jesus instead of our shame. 2 Corinthians 3 says this, such is the confidence that we have through Christ towards God, not that we are sufficient in and of ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God. So what we can say is, this thing used to define me. This awful thing happened to me, but I can bring it out and I can not let this shame keep me in a prison because Jesus was ashamed, and I can leave this here and be totally free forever. And now, whenever somebody else brings that up, anytime in my life, I can say, you know what? My confidence, my positivity, my love, my identity is not found in this thing, what I did or what happened to me. My identity, my confidence, my love, my positive emotion is found in the fact that Jesus did this for me. And that's never going to change, ever. That can never be touched. And if you know what, if you didn't give it to me, you can't take it away from me. I'm secure. I am totally secure in that place. And that's just, again, incredibly, incredibly powerful. See how that just gets to the root of shame that people can live with for a lifetime. I just, kind of personal testimony. I had a friend of mine, I've got a couple small groups with Freedom Church, and one of the guys, we were talking after 2020, going through a small group and just talking about what we want to leave in 2020. And he was just kind of hemming and hawing. Yeah, I struggle with this. I struggle with that. And he kind of was really general about it. And I just felt this conviction, like, man, this is not going to help him. And I just said, man, I'm not trying to call you out, but, can you name it? Can you name exactly what you struggled with in 2020? And I challenged him, said, name it and leave it. Name it and leave it. And he named specific sins that he struggled with. And man, it was powerful. It was powerful. When he named it in front of us, you could see that moment of apprehension as he was waiting for us to respond. And then this big smile came over his face. This big smile. And then he started to laugh. He's like, man, I feel so good. And I said, yeah, man, well, sounds like you're just like the rest of us. We all got a past. And you know what? You're forgiven. You're set free. That doesn't define you anymore. He literally was so light. That's that feeling of laughter. It's like, man, I feel so free from this moment. And that's the beauty of bringing something that we thought was going to be, we were going to be rejected for, and it was going to be shameful, out into the light, into the cross. And now we can be totally set free. No judgment from God because of the cross, and no judgment from his people because, hey, we all been there, and we've probably done crazier. So and the last one we're going to talk about is rejection. And this is the one that possibly stings the most of all. So rejection is to be known but not wanted. Man, does that hurt. Mother Teresa says this: the greatest disease is to be unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. We can cure physical diseases with medicine, but the only cure for loneliness, despair, and hopelessness is love. So Jesus experienced the ultimate rejection. Nobody was rejected more ever than Jesus. There's this verse in John chapter 1 that has always stuck with me since I read it. It says, Jesus came to that which was his own, and his own did not receive him. His own rejected him. Can you imagine that? The God of all gods who made this universe came down to be one of us, and we're like, nah, bro, get out of my face. We don't like you like that. In fact, we hate you. It's like you make an ant farm and you become an ant, and the ants reject you. You're like, bro, I literally brought you into existence. What are you talking about? And I can't imagine what that must have felt like for him. Jesus got rejected by the crowd. in Jerusalem, right? Remember when he's up standing before Pilate and he's an innocent man, and Pilate says like, yo, I'm going to let this guy go. He didn't do anything wrong. And what do they shout? Crucify him, crucify him. These are the people that he preached to. These are the people that he healed. These are the people that he fed, shouting for his death and his murder. And lastly, he's rejected on the cross. He cries out, Father, why have you forsaken me? You know, Jesus experienced the ultimate rejection from God so that we would never have to experience that rejection. And in our world right now, guys, I think we are seeing this massive identity crisis where we're experiencing a lot of rejection. Nobody knows who they are or what they're here to do. That's just the reality. And I think this is one of the fruits of relativism, right? If you can be free to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and there's no design in mind, then man, I just feel like in my heart of hearts, I know that I'm here for a reason and a purpose. So I now feel rejected by that. And it creates this massive alienation and schism for so many people. And then they just wrestle with so many negative emotions. And so that's just one way from our society. But many of us have just had this kind of nebulous feeling of not fitting in. And others of us have felt rejected by friends or rejected by family members or just wholesale rejected by our society. And sometimes the rejection that we've experienced is because of something that we've done, right? We betray somebody's trust, we lie, they find out, and we get rejected as a friend. And so now the rejection is part of our problem as well. And so sometimes rejection happens because of various forms of abuse as well. And this can be deeply, deeply seated. And so can God help us with that? Can God heal us from the rejection that is our fault and other people's fault? You know, Romans 8 says this, the spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit testifies with our spirit that we are God's very own children. And John 6:37 says this. This is Jesus speaking. All those the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. You know, we are adopted as God's sons and daughters. That means we have a permanent place in the family. It means we have an inheritance. It means that we will never be driven away by God. God will never find fault in you and reject you. He'll find fault in you and lead you to repentance and lead you to leaving it behind, but he's never going to reject you. He will always love you. He will never push you away. And there's something that's really important here. I think it's just to point out in Romans 8, it says, brought about your adoption to sonship. You know, back in the ancient world when this was written, women had no inheritance. So to call a woman a son is actually to give her a place of honor. It has less to do with gender and it has more to do about the inheritance portion. It has more to do about the family name and saying, you know what, the world is going to treat you like this, but God has a place for you. God has a home for you. You can call him dad. That's how intimately we can be brought into the heart of God and embraced by him as sons and daughters. And that's incredibly healing to know that we're not just tolerated by God, we're welcomed and we're desired. God wants you. He wants you, but it cost him everything to have you back. And that's how you know how much he loves you. So when God looks you in the face and says, I love you, that's not something to be taken for granted. It cost him everything to love us, so that when he embraces us, we can have confidence he will never, ever reject me. And so how do we respond when we hear all this? I think if we're really being honest and in our moments of sobriety and really of conviction by ourselves, maybe it's that moment when your head hits the pillow and you think about God. There's a profound sense of unworthiness that rises up when we hear about the lavish love of God. We just look and we say, if this is really this good, I'm not worthy of this. And that sense of unworthiness is deserved. To be honest, we don't deserve to be loved by God, but his forgiveness, his honor, and his adoption of us is the point of the gospel. And it is the power to heal. That is the power of grace. When we can look at what God has done for us and say, I don't deserve this, but he still did it because he loves me. That's grace, giving me what I don't deserve. All of this love, all of this healing, all of this forgiveness, honor, and adoption. And so when we come to face with who we really are and repent before God, it just is a dynamite transformation from the inside out. We are made free, brand new, and secure, and ready to love others the way we have been loved by God. And man, I wish this was just a once in a lifetime occurrence. Like I could just be set free one time, boom, and then I feel great for the rest of my life. But I've got to come back to this every day. And I think we all do. We got to come back to the cross every day, leave my burdens there, leave my mistakes there, leave my sins there, leave my shame there, and draw fresh strength from God. Strength to remember that I am loved and I am made whole by the price that was paid for me. And I think this is the foundation for emotional health, the eternal love of God. That's profound. And I think that's a much more profound response to emotional unhealth than the world has. And so, yeah, I think